we already looked at the next steps in terms of objects and body from the 3 categories in my map of juggling. So let's look at the last category, rhythm, and take some extra steps in that direction. Previously, we already saw an idea from music called triplets that we used. I was doing some juggling triplets, this idea of counting to 3 and stepping every 4 beats. But now let's take another concept from music and apply it to juggling, but in a visual way. I keep talking about how rhythm in juggling isn't something that you hear, but something that you can see. And so now let's make a visual interpretation of an idea in music that you normally hear. And that idea is called canon. In a canon, what's happening in one way is that the notes are chasing each other. It's also typically called something maybe called a round as well. It means, maybe you've heard this before, somebody starts singing a song, and halfway through, people start singing the same song over top of itself. So it's the same phrase that's layered over top of itself, but shifted, sometimes halfway, and in different ways. It means if I have a phrase here of music, it looks like this. I'm going to start playing this music, and then, let's say maybe halfway through, I start playing the exact same phrase of music again. And for this part here, it overlaps with the first time through. And I can do that as many times as I want. Again, halfway through this one, when I'm playing it, I can start playing the same phrase again. And I can just keep layering again and again and again. And this is called a canon, this kind of chase, or this kind of overlapping, where the music is chasing after itself and overlapping for a little bit. And this can overlap for different durations of time. Of course, we can also change that as much as we want. Here we started halfway through on the first time. We could also start maybe a quarter of the way through on the next time if we want to. Normally, when it's looping, it's a fixed rate, so if we start halfway through here, it'll keep consistent for the rest of the repetitions. But let's see what this means with juggling, because we're not using sound. We're going to use a visual interpretation of this. So for now, what you can do is take 1 ball each, and with your ball, make a sequence that is 4 beats long, or 4 moves long, or 4 tricks long, however you want to talk about it. But what I'm going to do is, for example, my sequence will be, I'm going to start on my foot, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So go ahead and try to make a 4 move sequence. Take like a minute to do this. It's very, very simple. 4 moves with 1 ball, however you want. Mine's very simple. 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't have to loop back to the beginning. It can be anything you want it to do. Make it really simple. It's not about technique. It's about exploring this concept of canon. So make it something you can remember, something very simple. What I made now with my sequence was the most simple thing I could think of in one way. There's no technique at all to it. 2, 3, 4. Also, my sequence I made has very clear parts in between the 4 movements. So, in this way I know what is number 1, it's very clear. I know it's number 2, it's very clear. Number 3 is also clear, and 4. So there's no confusion about the numbers of moves and when they start and stop. Cool. So now that you've done that, we don't have to make a new phrase, because what we're going to do is, of course, we have the same phrase that's just repeated again and again. So with 1 ball, we're going to start off with ball number 1, and it's going to go down through your sequence. So we have the first move, the second move, the third move, and the fourth move. But then we're going to take ball number 2, and we're going to do the exact same sequence as ball number 1, but we're going to start it here halfway through. If I divide the sequence in half here, it means that on count 3, I'm going to start to do the first sequence again. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course here is the most interesting part, because we're going to have 2 balls in action around your body. And in this way we have move number 1 repeated here at the same time as move number 3. And we have move number 2 repeated here at the same time as move number 4. And this is exactly what we did the other day when we had a circle warm-up. We each chose a throw in one hand, and then we added the 2 balls together at the same time. So essentially we're making the same problem here that we have to solve and see how is this going to work. So go down through your sequence, take ball number 1, and start off and do the first two moves, and then on throw number 3 or trick number 3, do move number 1 again, but with another ball. So with my sequence, it's going to look like this. I start off, the first ball starts on the foot, so I do 1, and then I do 2. And now move number 3 for me is it drops down to my hand. But I have to do it at the same time as move number 3, I have to do move number 1 again. So it means when this ball drops down, I kick up. And move number 4 for me was putting it underneath my arm. And move number 2 for me was putting here on my neck. So then after that, I have this, and then I'm done. Of course, if I want to complete the series, for now, I can go 3, and then 4, and then be done. So I'll show that again. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, if I want to, like that. But try it out with your own sequence now and see how that goes. Start with ball number 1, halfway through, on count number 3, we're going to add in the second ball. Now we're going to see the first attempt at canon with 2 objects. We're going to add in the second ball on count number 3 of the first phrase. And when you come show what you did, please show the first 1 ball sequence alone, and then see how the second ball adds in after that. Now we're going to try this again, that you've looked at it one time, and we're going to make a new sequence. Again, the sequence is only with 1 ball, and we're going to add the second ball in doing this exact same sequence. But this time, now that you've had experience making a sequence already, we can start to look at it in maybe a more practical way. Of course, when I showed you the idea of canon with my sequence, I knew what we were going to do. So I could kind of cheat a little bit and think ahead and know that I might solve some problems that you didn't know you were going to have. For example, the first one is, where does the second ball come from? And I liked how you had this idea that the hand also held the second ball as well. That was quite good. For my sequence again, my ball starts off on my foot, so it was pretty easy for me to have the second ball on the floor as well, and then just roll it onto my foot when I started to do my sequence, and it's already ready to go. So when we make a new sequence, you can also think and have that in mind and say, where does the second ball come from? It was nice that you had the second ball in your hand, but maybe the second ball is also hanging out somewhere else on your body. It's maybe hanging out on the floor, on a chair, on a window. I don't know. If you want to grab it and then have it come into the pattern that way, that's something to consider. The second thing to think about when you make a new sequence is that each part of your sequence of your 4 moves could be only using 1 body part at a time. It means that, for example, if I use my foot, I don't use the foot again later on. I've already used it 1 time. It means it's already clear and ready for the second ball to come in. I use my left hand to catch the ball there, and I give it to this shoulder here. Again, it means I'm not going to bring this ball back to the same hand because I know I'm going to have a collision later on. Of course, that can be fun to solve, and you did some nice solutions to your own problems, but already now we know what the game is, so we can be a bit more smart, a bit more clever, plan ahead, and just know that, okay, I used my left hand, it's done. Then I use this shoulder over here, I don't use it again, etc. And I use all these different parts of my body one at a time. So make a new sequence, 4 moves long. We're going to play the exact same game we just did. We're going to try to be a little bit smarter now that we know the effect that we're going to have. Where does the second ball come from? And how can we only use one part of our body, once inside of the whole sequence? What I like about these sequences, though, that you just showed, is that you do have this moment of the second ball chasing the first ball, especially when it comes around the body in different ways. And you start to recognize the movement of the first ball, and you can see it in the second ball, and it's kind of chasing the other ball around in the pattern. And it's really nice. And of course, now we're only doing one repetition through, but if we kept doing it, looping it more and more and more, we could start to see the second ball chasing the first one inside the pattern. Let's try it one more time. We're a little bit smarter, we have a little bit more experience. We're going to try to do the same exercise, a canon with 2 objects. We're going to add in the second object on count number 3. Now we're going to look at the second attempt to make a 2-ball canon with a little bit more experience, where we're going to try to use a more practical sequence, perhaps, of how to organize the technique using this rhythmic structure. Show the first ball, and then add in the second ball. Now we're going to take the same sequence you just made, which, remember, it is only one sequence of 4 moves long. And for now, we were starting the second ball on count number 3, so that we had these 2 moves that overlapped each other before continuing on. And then we stopped there for now. But now what I want to do is take the second ball and add it in already on count number 2 instead of number 3. It means that we start repeating almost straight away, and we're going to have 3 parts of technique that overlap each other. So 2 and 1 at the same time, 3 and 2 at the same time, 4 and 3 at the same time, and a little extra throw there on the end. So take the same sequence you just did and add in the second ball 1 count earlier, and let's see what that looks like. Now we're going to take the sequence from before and add in the second ball on count number 2 instead of count number 3. It's the same thing as the circle game warm-up we had before, where we made a sequence with one hand and a sequence with the other hand and tried to do them at the same time. Sometimes those combinations are physically impossible, and then we have to make an interpretation of what we're going to do out of that situation. Usually it's a rhythmic variation where we either start together and then end separately, or we start separately and they end together as much as we can. So in that way we have to understand what we're doing in a new way to make something come out of the situation where we can't physically make it happen otherwise. When I first worked with the idea of canon and juggling, I remember Eric Oberry had a sequence where the same hand at the same time had to throw a ball straight up and exactly straight down. But it was really cool. Eventually he found some sort of technique where he could rest the top ball on his thumb and somehow use his other fingers, and he had some sort of split multiplex throw where the balls went exactly up and down at the same time. And of course this is a type of throw we would never have otherwise than using some sort of concept like this to think of it. and then that way he did a throw straight up and straight down, the ball went down to his foot, the other ball went straight up to his other hand. It was a really nice throw. So in that moment he could solve the situation, but of course sometimes we have these practical problems of physicality that we can't solve in that way, and we have to solve them rhythmically. I want to show my original sequence, adding in the second ball on count number 2 instead of 3, and my 1 ball sequence was 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I start again, and I add in the second ball on count number 2, it means I have 1, and I added in already now, so I go 2, 3, 4, and then 4 again. Let's see what you did. Stop. I mean, the other guys didn't do it, so just do the 2. Or then they have to come back and refilm theirs. Great, we're going to look at the one final idea with Canon for now. We're going to take the same sequence you just had, and you're adding in the second object on count number 2, but now let's add in a third object on count number 3 of the original sequence, and that's count number 2 of the second sequence. It means we have overlapping objects here, and here, and here, and here. And I just want to point out that in terms of the idea of canon, once we do this, we're still not done. Of course, this concept can be applied in many different ways that we didn't do. For example, this sequence can be made to loop on purpose. For now, we were just going in one direction. The moves 1, 2, 3, 4. It didn't have to come back to the beginning again. But of course, you could do that if you wanted to. And then you could have that same sequence with 2 objects, always looping all the time, and have these having more overlapping pieces of technique. As well, this could just keep going on forever. Your sequence could be much longer, and it could be repeating more and more and more, adding in more objects, adding in objects on different beats, and overlapping the technique in different ways. But for now, let's try to do the same sequence you just did, but adding in a third object, again, on count number 3 of the first sequence, which is count number 2 of the second sequence. Okay, we're going to try the final exercise with canon. We're going to add in a third object as well to the sequence. So my sequence of 3 objects looks like this. I have 1, and then I go together, and again, here, 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 and here. So let's see what you have. this is a little bit of an epilogue to this idea of canon. Because when we were doing canons, we had these moments where the sequences would overlap, right? And you have to do these two pieces of technique at the same time. So now, what if we just looked at this rhythmical structure where things happen at the same time all the time? And in this way, I'm going to call it something like a blend. So now we're going to do a blend, which is a made-up thing that I made up. This word blend is simply going to mean that everything happens at the same time. Because that's the most interesting part that we were doing in the canon, I think. We're trying to make things happen at the exact same time. In this way, we can make pieces of technique that are on purpose blended together with all of the sequences going on simultaneously. Normally with juggling, of course, with 3 balls, you're going to start off and you're going to throw the first ball, and after that, throw the second ball. But now, everything's going to happen at the exact same time. We're going to use 3 objects, and the way we're going to make a blend to compose this is you just start with 1 object. And again, so far we've only been working with balls, but of course all the work we do can be done with clubs and rings and cigar boxes and diablos and whatever you want. So for now I'm going to use a ring to demonstrate this, and I'm going to start with 1 object. I'm going to make a 3-object blend, and the first thing I do with 1 object is I make a movement with it, or I make a trick, or I make a piece of technique. So for now I'm going to say that my thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ring and take it on and off my head. So I take a movement of 1 object, and now I don't change that, and I take a second object and I add it in at the same time. And the way I added the second object can be in 2 different ways. The first way is that the second object can do a movement on its own that's independent of what the first object does. And that's totally fine. It's kind of what we've been doing so far, where we take 2 random pieces of technique and do them at the same time and see how they work out, and see what happens. Or you can also start to think about already from the beginning and say, okay, what is the first object doing? And in my first object, I take it off my head and I put it back on. So then I can start to think and say, well, wait a second. If that's happening with the first object, what can I do with the second object to directly relate physically to the movement of the first object? So in this way, I'm going to say that if I take the ring on and off, I'm going to put this ring on the elbow at the same time. So now I have 2 objects and 2 movements at the same time. So I have this is my 2-object sequence, and then I just have to add in a 3rd object. And again, when you add in the 3rd object, you don't change at all what happened with the first 2 objects. You have to add in the 3rd one in such a way that it doesn't destroy or ruin what you've made before. And again, when you add in the 3rd object, it can also do a random movement that's not related at all. It's just rhythmically related. And that way we can see what happens. Or, from the beginning, you can start to plan out and think, okay, I know what's happening with the 2 other objects, but how does the 3rd one relate to that physically? Can I do something with the 3rd object that is more related or integrated? And that way I have my blend now, that I prepared beforehand, of course. I'm going to do a little throw of the 3rd ring, and I'm not going to change at all what I did with the other 2 rings. So I have, this is my blend now. I have 3 movements at the same time. Again, 3 movements at the same time. I don't change. The first one I make, I don't change. I do the second one, I don't change, and I just add a 3rd one. So let's try to make a blend now with 3 objects of your choice. Okay, we're going to look at the blends, and when we see these, it would be really nice if you could show starting with 1 object, and then showing with 2 objects, and then showing finally the completed blend with 3 objects all at the same time. No.
Oh, no.
So start.
Yeah, run 1, 2.
Start with 1, and then just like I did. Like I did my movement, and then I added the second one in.
Okay, so 1. Oh no, shit.
Do it from the beginning.
Yeah, because they were talking at the same time while we were doing. Nice.
Is five anything of my head or do you want them from floor?
Floor.
Okay, cool.
Let's try to make a blend one more time. And now that we had experience doing it the first time, we start to see that the rhythm can be divided sometimes into one or two parts. So sometimes you have a move that takes one or two movements that can be seen as in one complete beat or one complete movement. It has two halves, for example. So try to make all of the resulting moves with the other props in relationship to the rhythm of the first one. So for example, if you have a twirl of a ring and then it stops, you can start to say that, well, as the ring spins, halfway around, that could kind of be seen as half of the beat of the movement. And then you're going to stop, and that's the completion of the movement. It means if I make another move with another prop in relationship to the rhythm of the first one, that other prop should also have the same kind of rhythm. So that prop doesn't just do, for example, a placement and you're done, right? So if I'm spinning a ring, and then it's going to continue on around, but halfway through that I'm doing a placement, the rhythms aren't exactly matched. And that way we can really talk literally about the duration of time and say, well, if the first prop does a movement that takes exactly this amount of time, please make the other props take the exact same amount of time. You can see when Alexei did his club movements as the blend, it was really effective, and we all saw that. It's because they all took the exact same amount of time. And he had a start and a stop that was exactly on time. And it was really visually effective. So the first thing to do is to be aware of the rhythm and make a new one. And the second thing is to, again, take even more advantage of the physical situation you're in. When you make the first move of the first prop and say, okay, how is my body? My arm is crossed over here. Oh, I could catch a ball maybe here in those arms then. And once I do that, what's the other thing that's happening in my body? And this way, sometimes we talk about the architecture of the body or the shape of the body. What is the architecture or the physical structure doing that we can add in props and take advantage of the situation that's already there? So let's take one more time and try to make a blend and make it more rhythmical and also more architectural. We're going to look at our second attempt to make a blend. And again, in this way, what we're using is the idea of rhythm to combine the focus of all three objects together at the same time equally. I think normally when we're juggling, we more or less only focus on one object at a time, even if it's just for a very short time and a very fast sequence. Normally, I think when we make juggling, we start to juggle and we say, okay, now it's this object's turn. What am I going to do with this object? Even if it's for a split second, what am I going to do with the object after that, etc. Because of course, technically, that's much easier to focus only on one object at a time than all three at the same time. And then we have these technical problems. But you can imagine if we didn't just make one moment of three objects moving at the same time in a blend, but a whole sequence of blends, so that every moment, one after the other, was all three objects being used equally in terms of movement and integrated into the physical reality of what's happening. That'd be a pretty crazy sequence. And it's not how we compose normally now. But in this way, we do have this idea of rhythm that turns into a visual rhythm, because a blend is very visual. All three objects are being considered equally almost at the same time, or at least integrated into the single movement of one object, whereas normally we only concentrate on one object at a time. So here's the blend that I made. Again now, I start with one object. What I did, I added a second one, and then the third one. Something like that. Let's see what you did.